I've always been the second best in my family. Not the favorite, not the golden child, just Eleanor the accountant. At 55, I've spent over 3 decades building a respectable career as an accounting manager, yet in my family's eyes, I'm still just the reliable daughter who fades into the background. My brother Andrew, 3 years my senior, has always been the apple of our parents' eyes. When we were kids in the 1970s, Andrew got the shiny new Schwinn bike while I got his hand-me-downs with the peeling paint. On birthdays, he'd get the latest stereo equipment while I'd get practical gifts like sweaters or books. In high school, Mom and Dad attended every single one of Andrew's football games, but they only made it to one of my debate competitions, the finals, which I won, by the way. Even then, they spent half the time talking about how Andrew would have been proud. Dad's inheritance was just the cherry on top of a lifetime of favoritism. Andrew got the sprawling 4-bedroom family home in the nice part of town, while I got a modest cash settlement that barely covered the down payment on my 2-bedroom house on the edge of the suburbs. Mom had begged Dad to leave Andrew the house. I overheard her once, though she never knew I did. "Robert, please," she'd said, her voice taking on that persuasive tone I'd heard countless times throughout my childhood. "Andrew is the man of the family. He needs the space. Eleanor will be fine with the cash. She's single anyway." I never complained about any of this. What would be the point? In our family, Andrew came first. That was just how things had been for the past 58 years of my life. So, I wasn't surprised when at our monthly family dinner, Andrew and his wife Sophia cleared their throats dramatically and announced they had big news. Andrew's salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled as usual, and Sophia's designer outfit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "We've decided to sell the house," Andrew said, grinning widely, the lines around his eyes crinkling. I nearly choked on my water, feeling the liquid go down the wrong way. "We're investing in an amazing opportunity," Sophia continued, practically bouncing in her seat, her professionally manicured hands gesturing excitedly. At 52, she still maintained the enthusiasm of someone half her age when it came to spending money. Mom and Dad, now in their late 70s and early 80s, clapped their hands in delight. Mom's arthritis didn't seem to bother her in that moment of excitement. "Oh, how wonderful!" Mom exclaimed, her eyes lighting up behind her bifocals. "What kind of business venture?" I set my glass down carefully, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. "What exactly are you investing in?" I asked cautiously, my accounting manager instincts kicking in. "It's complicated," Andrew replied, waving his hand dismissively, the same gesture he'd been using to brush off my concerns since we were children. "Derek is starting this medical equipment company that's going to revolutionize diabetes care. We're getting in on the ground floor." "Derek Matthews from college?" I asked, remembering Andrew's former roommate who had floated from one get-rich-quick scheme to another for decades. "He projects a 300% return in the first year alone," Sophia added, her eyes practically glittering at the prospect. "We could double our investment before Christmas." 300%? I repeated, carefully setting down my fork. The metal clinked against the porcelain plate in the sudden silence. "That sounds highly suspicious. Look, you two have Lily and Noah to think about. They're only 12 and 10. Are you sure selling your house is the best move? Maybe invest some savings instead?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sophia's smile stiffened, and Andrew gave me that condescending look I'd known my entire life. "Eleanor," he said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "I know you mean well, but I studied finance at Westmore College. You're just an accounting manager who took classes at the community college. I think I understand investments a bit better than you do." I bit my tongue, feeling the familiar sting of his dismissal. What Andrew conveniently forgot was that he barely graduated from Westmore, while I graduated with honors and had been promoted twice in the last decade at my firm. Besides, Andrew continued, helping himself to more potatoes, "Dad gave me the house for a reason. He always knew I had a better head for business. This is exactly the kind of opportunity he would have wanted me to seize." I could have told him right then that Dad had only given him the house because Mom had practically begged him to. I could have pointed out that Dad, who built his modest wealth through careful saving and conservative investments during his 40 years in construction, would have been horrified at the idea of Andrew selling his house to invest in some vague medical venture. I could have mentioned that Derek had already cycled through 3 failed startups in the past 15 years. But why bother? Andrew was 58 years old. He and Sophia had made their decision, and frankly, after a lifetime of playing second fiddle, I wasn't feeling particularly inclined to save him from himself. You're right, I said instead, taking another sip of water. It's your decision. Mom beamed at Andrew, her wrinkled face alight with pride. We're so proud of you for taking this leap, she said. It takes courage to seize an opportunity like this. Dad nodded in agreement, his thinning white hair barely moving. Your grandfather would be proud too. For the rest of dinner, Andrew and Sophia talked about all the things they planned to do with their newfound wealth. They'd travel to Europe, buy a vacation home in Florida, put Lily and Noah in private school. I stayed quiet, nodding and smiling when appropriate. Meanwhile, I mentally went through my renovation plans for my own small house. I'd been systematically updating it room by room using money I'd saved from my boring accounting manager job. Last month, I'd finished the kitchen with new quartz countertops. Next up was the bathroom. At 55, these small improvements gave me immense satisfaction, something tangible I could control and enjoy in my otherwise predictable life. 3 months later, 3 months after that fateful dinner, I was in my newly renovated bathroom enjoying a hot shower under my rainfall showerhead. The steam fogged the glass doors I'd splurged on, and the heated tile floor was a luxury my tired feet appreciated after decades of standing on cold bathroom floors. At 55, I'd learned that small comforts made a big difference in daily life. My phone started buzzing incessantly on the marble countertop. I ignored it at first, determined to enjoy the shower I'd worked so hard to afford. But after the fifth consecutive call, I reluctantly turned off the water and wrapped myself in a plush towel. 6 missed calls from Mom. Not a good sign. I called her back immediately, water still dripping onto my bathroom floor. Eleanor, thank goodness. Mom answered, her voice tense and slightly shrill. Can you come over? It's about Andrew. An hour later, I pulled into my parents' driveway and immediately noticed something odd. A mountain of luggage and boxes piled on the front porch of their modest retirement home. The sight sent a wave of understanding through me before I'd even gotten out of the car. Before I could ring the doorbell, the door swung open, and I was nearly knocked over by Lily and Noah, who came barreling into my legs. Aunt Ellie, Lily cried, her arms wrapping around my waist. At 12, she was getting tall, but her eyes still held the innocence of childhood. We're staying with Grandma and Grandpa now. I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway, her face drawn and tired, the lines around her eyes deeper than I'd ever seen them. Behind her, Andrew was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, while Sophia sat on the couch staring blankly at her laptop. What's going on? I asked Mom quietly, though I already had a pretty good idea. Mom ushered me inside and closed the door. Andrew and Sophia had to leave their apartment, she whispered, her arthritic hands trembling slightly. The rent was just too much. Ah, so they'd blown through the house money already. After they sold the house, Andrew and Sophia had promptly bought a flashy red Audi sports car, completely impractical for a family with 2 small children. Then they'd rented a luxury apartment downtown, and Andrew had quit his steady job at the investment firm to focus on the medical equipment venture. I'd heard through the family grapevine that they'd dumped about $500,000 into Derek's business and spent the remaining $100,000 on the car and a lavish vacation to the Maldives, leaving the kids with Mom and Dad for 3 weeks. Derek said the first quarter is always slow, Andrew said loudly, having finished his call. He forced a smile, the new worry lines on his forehead betraying his confident tone. But things are going to pick up any day now. I wandered into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and Dad followed me in. At 81, he moved slower than he used to, his tall frame slightly stooped with age. How bad is it? I asked quietly, watching him struggle to reach for a glass from the cabinet. Dad sighed, running a hand through his thinning white hair. They've burned through everything, Ellie. The apartment was $4,000 a month. The car payment is another $1,500. They couldn't keep up. He lowered his voice further. And the investment. Dad's expression darkened, the wrinkles around his mouth deepening. Derek keeps saying they're on the verge of a breakthrough, but he shook his head, his blue eyes clouded with worry. I've got a bad feeling about it. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as Andrew scrambled to find work. The brother who had always coasted through life on charm and family connections found himself humbled by the realities of job hunting in his late 50s. He eventually took a job at a car dealership, a significant step down from his previous banking position, but at least it was something. Meanwhile, Sophia tried to put on a brave face, posting carefully curated photos on Instagram that made it seem like everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. My parents' modest retirement home wasn't designed for 6 people. 3 generations suddenly crammed into a space meant for an elderly couple enjoying their golden years. Mom called me one evening sounding exhausted, her voice thinner and more fragile than I'd ever heard it. Eleanor, sweetie, I hate to ask, but she hesitated, the sound of pots clanging in the background. We're struggling a bit with groceries for extra mouths to feed, you know. I knew what was coming. How much do you need, Mom? I asked, already reaching for my checkbook, a habit I couldn't break even in the age of digital payments. Oh, anything would help, she said quickly. We're just a bit tight this month. I promised to transfer some money right away, settling on $600, enough to help but not enough to strain my own budget. When I told her the amount, she thanked me profusely, though I could hear a hint of disappointment in her voice. She'd clearly been hoping for more. The next month, I got another call, and then another. The $600 monthly transfer became a regular thing, eating into the savings I'd been putting aside for my own retirement. I didn't mind helping my elderly parents, but I couldn't help but notice that Andrew and Sophia still managed to keep the Audi, despite their financial troubles. Priorities, I guess. One night, I attended my cousin Julia's birthday party. At 50, Julia had organized a small gathering at her favorite restaurant, and I was looking forward to an evening away from family drama, or so I thought, until my Aunt Vivian cornered me by the dessert table. At 75, Vivian had the same direct manner as my mother, but without the favoritism. Ellie dear, she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned in. How are you holding up with all this Andrew business? I shrugged, picking at a chocolate truffle. I'm just trying to help where I can. Aunt Vivian leaned in closer, the scent of her familiar perfume bringing back childhood memories. Well, you should know that your parents are at their wits' end. They love Andrew, of course, but having them all there, it's taking a toll. She took a sip of her wine, her lipstick leaving a crimson mark on the glass. And between you and me, they've got a plan to fix things. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. What kind of plan? They want to move Andrew and his family into your house, she said bluntly. Your mom thinks it makes perfect sense since you live alone in a 2-bedroom. I nearly dropped my dessert plate. What? They're saying it would just be for a few months, but… Aunt Vivian shook her head, her earrings catching the light. Margaret told me they're hoping you'll eventually just move out, let Andrew have the place. I stood there frozen as Aunt Vivian squeezed my arm sympathetically. I thought you should know. It didn't seem right them plotting behind your back. The party continued around me, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was the audacity of it all. They weren't just planning to ask me to take in Andrew's family. They were planning to push me out of my own home, a home I'd spent years renovating and making my own. As I drove home that night, my mind was racing. I knew what was coming. The guilt trips, the family pressure, the inevitable, it's just temporary, that would somehow become permanent. And once Andrew and his family moved in, I'd be expected to pay the bills, clean up after them, and eventually give up my own space entirely. After 30 years of putting others first, was I really going to let this happen? The unfairness of it burned in my chest, a lifetime of being second best suddenly crystallizing into sharp focus. No, not this time. At 55, I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me again. I wasn't going to sacrifice the remaining years of my life to bail out my brother's poor decisions. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table thinking. By the time the glass was empty, I had a plan. The next morning, I walked into my boss Patricia's office without an appointment. At 62, Patty had been with the company even longer than I had, and she looked up from her computer surprised. Eleanor, everything okay? You look different today. Remember that accounting director position at the Chicago branch? I asked, not bothering with small talk. Is it still open? I want the job. Patty leaned back in her chair, studying me. That's a senior position, Eleanor. More responsibility, different environment. It's a big move at this stage in your career. I'm ready for it, I said, a certainty in my voice I hadn't felt in years. I've been here over 30 years. I've consistently exceeded my targets. My performance reviews are excellent. I'm qualified. Patty nodded thoughtfully. Well, I can't say I want to lose you here, but she smiled. You'd be great for the position. Let me make a few calls. She paused. The position starts in 4 weeks. Is that enough time for you to get your affairs in order? Perfect, I said, already mentally calculating my next steps. As soon as I left Patty's office, I called my friend Diane, who worked as a realtor. We'd been friends since our 30s, and she'd helped me buy my house 8 years ago. I need to sell my house, I said without preamble, as quickly as possible. Well, your place is in a good neighborhood, and you've done those nice renovations, she thought for a moment. If we price it aggressively, we could probably get offers within a week. But Ellie, are you sure about this? Never been more sure of anything in my life, I said firmly, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders with each word. 2 weeks later. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity that left me with little time to second guess my decision. Diane worked her magic in the real estate market, and we had 3 competing offers within 5 days of listing. I accepted the highest one, $285,000, which was $45,000 more than I paid for it 8 years ago. Not bad for a small house in today's market, especially with the personal touches I'd added. Meanwhile, I researched condominiums in Chicago, focusing on areas close to the company branch. Real estate was cheaper there than in my current city, and I found a beautiful one-bedroom in a modern building with a gym and rooftop terrace for $220,000. At 55, I was drawn to the idea of a secure building with amenities and less maintenance. I made an offer immediately and started the purchasing process. Through it all, I told no one in my family what I was doing. Mom called twice, once to thank me for the monthly money transfer and once to casually ask if I'd be free for dinner next Saturday. We have some things we want to discuss with you, she said, trying to sound nonchalant, though I could hear the practiced edge in her voice, the same tone she'd used throughout my childhood when she wanted me to give something up for Andrew's benefit. Sure, Mom, I replied, equally casual. I'll be there. I arranged for a moving company to pack and transport most of my belongings to a storage facility in Chicago, scheduled for the day before the family dinner. I kept only what would fit in 2 suitcases, enough clothes for a couple of weeks. My laptop, favorite books, and a few personal items that had sentimental value. A small painting my grandmother had given me, photo albums, and my father's old watch that he'd given me on my 50th birthday. The day after the movers left, I checked into a modest hotel downtown. It felt strange sleeping in an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by generic decor rather than the home I'd carefully created. But it was only temporary, just 3 more days until I flew to Chicago. Saturday evening arrived, and I drove to my parents' house for the last time. I parked a block away, not wanting my packed car to give anything away. As I walked up the familiar path to the front door, I took a deep breath. This was it, the confrontation I'd been avoiding my whole life. At 55, I was finally going to stand up for myself. Mom answered the door with a tight smile, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the household chaos. Eleanor, good you're here. We're just about to serve dinner. Inside, the atmosphere was strained. Dad sat at the head of the table looking uncomfortable, his shoulders slightly hunched. Andrew and Sophia were there, too, both wearing expressions that were attempting to be pleasant but came across as smug. The kids were nowhere to be seen, probably watching TV in another room. We exchanged a few empty phrases about the weather, local news, and how busy work had been. The tension was palpable, everyone avoiding the real reason for this dinner. Finally, Mom set down her fork with a deliberate motion. Eleanor, honey, we wanted to talk to you about your house. Her voice had the same persuasive quality she'd used my entire life when she wanted me to give something up for Andrew. What about it? I asked innocently, pushing my piece around the plate. Well, Mom continued, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. Your father and I have been thinking it might make sense for Andrew and his family to stay with you for a little while, just until they get back on their feet. I looked at Andrew, who was studying his plate with sudden interest, a strand of gray hair falling across his forehead. Sophia was watching me, a hint of challenge in her eyes, her manicured nails tapping lightly on the table. For how long? I asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. Andrew shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years it almost made me laugh. Not sure yet. Things are starting to look up with the investment, though. Derek says we're due for a big breakthrough any day now. I had to suppress a laugh. 3 months later, and he was still clinging to that fantasy. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I mean, my house is pretty small. There are only 2 bedrooms. You could take the smaller bedroom and give them the master, Mom suggested quickly, her words coming out in a well-rehearsed rush. Or maybe you could stay with a friend for a bit, just until things settle down. I opened my mouth to argue further, then caught myself. What was the point? In a few days, I'd be gone, and this would all be moot. Better to let them think they'd won for now. I sighed heavily, shoulders slumping in what I hoped looked like defeat. Fine, I said flatly. When are they planning to move in? Mom looked surprised, clearly having expected more resistance. Her eyes darted to Dad, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Well, we were thinking next weekend. Would that work? Her voice was cautious, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sure, I said, picking up my fork again and stabbing a piece of roast chicken disinterestedly. I guess I'll start packing up some of my things. Andrew and Sophia exchanged triumphant glances. Mom looked relieved. Dad still wouldn't meet my eyes. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Mom, Dad, Andrew, and Sophia started discussing logistics, which furniture would stay, which would go into storage, whether my home office could be converted into a playroom for the kids. I mostly pushed food around my plate, offering one-word responses when directly addressed. After dessert, I stood up. I should get going. Lots to do if I'm moving out next weekend. As I walked to the door, I heard them continue their conversation, voices dropping to hushed tones but still audible. I told you she'd agree, Mom was saying. Eleanor's always been reasonable. Should we help her pack her stuff? Dad asked, a hint of concern in his voice that warmed my heart slightly. No need, Sophia replied dismissively. Most of it can just stay in the garage. It's not like she has anything valuable. We'll need to get a new couch, Andrew added. That old thing she has kills my back. I closed the front door quietly behind me, their voices fading as I walked away. They'd already forgotten I was there, already planning how to take over my space, erase my presence, replace my things with theirs. But little did they know there would be nothing for them to take over. Back at the hotel, I checked my phone to find a text from Mom. Thank you for understanding, sweetie. Your brother is so grateful. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a quick message to Diane confirming that everything was on track with the house closing. She replied immediately. All good. New owners get keys on Thursday. The next morning, I woke up early, checked out of the hotel, and headed to the airport, leaving behind 55 years of being the dependable daughter, the reliable sister, the one who always gave in. New life in Chicago. As the plane took off carrying me toward my new life in Chicago, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. My new condominium would be ready in 2 days. My new job started in a week. I had about $65,000 left from the house sale after buying the condo, which I planned to invest conservatively, of course, unlike some people I knew. My first week in Chicago passed in a pleasant blur. I settled into my new condo, a sleek 1 bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline that took my breath away each morning. The neighborhood was vibrant, full of small cafes and boutiques. My new job came with a corner office and a 15% raise. Everything was going perfectly. Until Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd left town. I was unpacking the last of my kitchen boxes when my phone exploded with notifications. 27 missed calls in the span of 2 hours, 15 from mom, 8 from dad, and 4 from Andrew, plus dozens of text messages, each more frantic than the last. I knew exactly what had happened. Today was the day Andrew and his family were supposed to move into my house. I could picture it perfectly. Andrew pulling up with a rented truck full of their belongings, knocking on the door, and finding strangers living there. The thought brought a smile to my face, not out of malice, but from the satisfaction of finally taking control of my own life. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto my new couch, debating whether to respond or simply block their numbers. After a lifetime of giving in, didn't I deserve this one moment of peace? Before I could decide, my phone rang again, Mom. Against my better judgment, I answered. Eleanor Elizabeth Thompson. My mother's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. What have you done? Hello to you too, Mom, I said calmly, taking a sip of wine and watching the city lights begin to twinkle outside my window. Don't you dare act innocent. Andrew just went to your house with a moving truck, and there's another family living there. They said they bought it 2 weeks ago. That's correct, I replied. The Johnsons. Lovely couple, 2 teenage kids. They got a great deal. There was a stunned silence. Then, you sold your house without telling anyone? How could you do something so underhanded? I nearly choked on my wine. Underhanded? That's rich coming from the person who was planning to push me out of my own home. Another silence. Then, in a much quieter voice, where are you, Eleanor? Chicago. I got a promotion, accounting director at the branch office here. Chicago? Her voice cracked. So you just left without saying goodbye, without telling anyone? Kind of like how you were planning to kick me out of my own house without asking first, I pointed out, surprising myself with my own directness. That was different, Mom insisted, her voice taking on the defensive tone I knew so well. We're family. We needed your help. No, Mom. Andrew and Sophia needed a bailout for their bad decisions, and instead of holding them accountable, you decided I should be the one to sacrifice again. Like always. That's not fair. Isn't it? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, 55 years of built-up frustration finally finding its voice. My entire life, it's been Andrew first, Eleanor second. When we needed new school clothes, Andrew got the designer ones. When we both had events, you went to his. When Dad received his inheritance, Andrew got the nice house because you convinced Dad he deserved it more. Eleanor, and now, when Andrew screws up royally, when he and Sophia make the stupidest financial decision possible, your solution is to take away my house, my home, that I worked for, that I've been fixing up room by room with my own money. No, not this time. The line went quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, I don't know who you think you're talking to, young lady, but I am still your mother, and as of this moment, I no longer consider you my daughter. I had prepared myself for anger, for guilt trips, for manipulation, but this still hurt more than I expected. I took a deep breath, feeling the sting of tears threatening. I think we both know that's always been the case, Mom, I said quietly. Oh, and I'm canceling the monthly transfers, the $600 I've been sending for Andrew's family. That's done. She went silent again, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Her anger at me versus her need for my money. We don't want your money, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Good, because you're not getting it anymore. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could respond and blocked her number. Then I blocked Dad, Andrew, and Sophia for good measure. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with texts from unfamiliar numbers. Andrew using Dad's phone, Mom using a friend's. I turned off my phone completely and finished my wine in peaceful silence. The next day, I bought a new phone with a new number. I shared it only with my closest friends, my new colleagues, and Aunt Vivian, who sent me a congratulatory bouquet when I told her what I'd done. Epilogue. 6 months later. 6 months passed. I thrived in my new position, the responsibilities of being an accounting director challenging me in ways I hadn't experienced in years. I made new friends through a book club and a gardening class I joined on weekends. I even dated a bit, nothing serious, but enjoyable dinners with interesting men my age who appreciated my company. Most importantly, I lived life on my own terms, without the shadow of my family's expectations hanging over me. My condo had become a true home. I decorated it with care, choosing pieces that reflected my taste rather than practicality or budget constraints. The rooftop garden became my sanctuary, where I grew herbs and flowers in decorative pots. At 56, I was finally living the life I'd always wanted but never felt entitled to pursue. Occasionally, I thought about my family. I wondered if Andrew and his family were still living with my parents, if the investment had ever paid off. I doubted it. If mom and dad were still covering their expenses. I wondered if they ever reflected on how they treated me, if they ever regretted it. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. One Sunday morning, as I was enjoying coffee on my balcony, the Chicago skyline glittering in the morning sun, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, but with my hometown area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Eleanor? It's Julia. My cousin's voice sounded tentative. I hope it's okay that I got your number from mom. I thought you should know what's going on here. A knot formed in my stomach. What is it? Andrew and his family are still at your parents'. They're having money problems, big ones. The investment was a total scam. Derek took off with everyone's money months ago. Can't say I'm surprised, I murmured, watching a bird land on my balcony railing. Yeah, well, your parents are struggling too. They're behind on bills because they're supporting 4 extra people. Uncle Robert had to come out of retirement to work part-time at the hardware store. At 81, he's stocking shelves 3 days a week. I said nothing, waiting for the guilt trip, the plea for me to send money again. But Julia surprised me. I'm not telling you this because I think you should help, she said quickly. Actually, the opposite. Everyone in the family is talking about how you were the smart one, getting out when you did. Even Aunt Margaret has admitted privately to Mom that they shouldn't have tried to take your house. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: vindication, sadness for my elderly father having to work, concern for the children caught in the middle of adult mistakes. How are Lily and Noah doing? I asked, thinking of my niece and nephew. They're okay. Noah's struggling a bit in school with all the upheaval, but Lily's resilient. She talks about you sometimes, says she misses her Aunt Ellie. That touched me. Tell her I miss her too, if you see her. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, watching the city below. The morning light cast long shadows across the urban landscape, not unlike the shadows my family history had cast across my life. I felt no satisfaction in my family's struggles, but no guilt either. They had made their choices. I had made mine. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, and the view from here was beautiful. At 56, I had finally discovered that being second best in someone else's story meant I was free to be the protagonist in my own. I picked up my phone again and scrolled to Julia's number. Maybe it was time to rebuild some bridges, selectively, on my terms. I could send a care package for the kids, perhaps even invite Julia to visit Chicago. The thought brought a smile to my face. Life was too short to waste on resentment, but it was also too precious to sacrifice for those who didn't value it. This was my time now, and I intended to make the most of every moment.